Hi, everyone, and welcome. My name is Emily, and I'll be hosting this panel along with Giulia. And we are going to be talking about the state of the conversation design industry today. And I'm really excited for this conversation because I feel like there's been a lot going on in the space. Stuff changes day to day. And I think, yeah, it feels like there's been a huge shift with what we do and even job titles and so many other things. So I just wanted to, yeah, grab this amazing panel and talk about it. So let's get started with some introductions, and then we'll get into it. Lisa, do you want to go first?
Sure. My name is Lisa Falkson. I've been doing something in conversation design since about the year 2000 and studied speech and NLU in graduate school before that. I was formerly at Amazon for many years and a couple car startups and also Nuance Communications, which is where I learned to be what was then called a dialogue designer and is now a conversation designer. So happy to be reunited with some old friends like Karen and also some newer friends like Diana and Ashwini to talk about the space.
Awesome. Diana, you want to go next?
Sure, I'll go next. My name is Diana Nandigam. You may have seen me before as Elaine Onzaldo. I had a legal name change in December, so that's updated everywhere. I'm still the same person, but just different name. I've been a conversation designer, I would say like 5 years now. 5. I got introduced to conversation design in 2020, like in the midst of COVID. And so when everything went online, that's kind of how I got introduced to it, just like watching everything on YouTube and all the webinars that were happening at that time. I don't have a design or technical background. It was kind of something that I fell into a little bit because I moved from the middle of the United States out to California and Silicon Valley. And I was just exposed to a lot of ideas and a lot of different projects and teams. So I kind of like gained my credentials. Like I literally built my career brick by brick and team by team. So now I'm here and I've been working at Meta as a conversation designer and most recently product designer for the past 4 years working on wearables, which is why they're on my face right now. But yeah, good to see everyone.
Thank you. Karen, you want to go next?
Sure. Hi, everyone. I'm Karen Kaushansky. And this year marks 30 years that I have been doing this. So 1996. I only have a couple of years probably on Lisa, but it's true that Lisa and I worked together at Nuance. And I have done big things, little things, conversation design, voice interaction design, natural user interfaces. I've worked also at Tummy and Microsoft, Magic Leap. So now we're starting to get into like AR, kind of augmented reality kind of spaces. I'm currently a conversation design lead at Google on Gemini Live. So that's having an open back and forth natural conversation with your LLM.
Awesome. Ashwini?
Yes. Hi, everyone. I'm Ashwini, and I have been a conversation designer or learned about conversation design around the same time Diana did, I think during the pandemic. And shortly after that, found a way to get a role and get some real experience doing design. And my design experience spans like chat, messaging. I've done, and now I'm at General Motors, working on the in-vehicle experience. But I will say my background is in linguistics. So I've thought a lot about, my research used to be on conversations. I've thought a lot about how humans communicate. So it was a pretty small pivot to start thinking about how do humans communicate with technology, right? And other than doing conversation design, I also really like keeping up with the field, was really excited about LLMs because it kind of goes back into that linguistics mode a little bit for me. And yeah, I also have a UX research background, which I'd love to see a little bit more of in design. But yeah, we're going to talk about all this. So that's an introduction from me. So linguistics background, now in design, and I'm fairly excited about LLMs.
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely changed the industry for sure. So on that note, I guess I'd love to hear all of your perspectives on where conversation was just even a few years ago, like when we started out, compared to now. Ashwini, do you want to start?
Yeah, sure. Well, I'm assuming you're asking about the pre-LLM to the LLM
Yes.
transition.
Yes.
So I think, yeah, absolutely. Before the LLMs came into play, conversations were really a lot of scripting, thinking about what is an ideal conversation? What are some things, what are all the possibilities for what users would say? So it's heavily scripted, the word we use now is deterministic often, right? I don't think we were using that before until we had a contrast. But conversation design has always, I think, needed people that have a balance of creativity and technical knowledge. So I don't think that has changed. But yeah, so I think that remains the same. So basically, everything was heavily scripted, a lot of high control. And now with LLMs, we're able to be a little bit more creative. There are actually certain use cases that we weren't able to address before, like multi-turn, multi-intents, and things that we can use. But the system comes with strengths and weaknesses, as all systems do. So I think the tools have changed, but you still need people that are creative, and you still need people that understand the technical side as well.
Yeah, I like to think of it as what's stayed the same and what's changed. So what stayed the same is that the core underlying principles of conversation design, to be cooperative, to help people get their end goal, to be responsive, to be respectful, all, in what you write and what you, the system that you create for the customer, the user. What's changed is really the underlying technology, the way we spec it out, very different, right? We don't write prompt tables and flow charts the same way. And we don't do like highly tuned sort of, I used to spend tons of time refining the language of a specific prompt and then tuning it via SSML to sound just so. So that craft doesn't really happen because the LLM is generating the dialogue itself, and then ideally, hopefully, the intonation and all that stuff works well also. So I think it has been a huge shift, both in terms of how we document it and how we what our day-to-day tasks are. Right, there's a lot more understanding of prompting. There's a lot more understanding of how you control and rein in the LLM to do what you want versus creating something from scratch that has a level of complexity that you're adding to it. It's more trying to restrain something that is very wide open.
I feel like something else that we struggled with just a few years ago, like I helped bring like Google Assistant to the Pixel Watch. So taking like the assistant for a new surface, it was really like, how do you customize for that surface? And a lot of it was about context, right? And so it just felt hard to kind of craft responses for a watch versus like for a different surface, knowing, it was, on your wrist, and knowing kind of the context, or even, hopefully we'll talk about this a little bit, but like the memory and personalization was like non-existent. And so it was very hard to like continue a conversation with the user in that way. So I think that we will talk about this, how things have changed today.
Diana, any thoughts?
Yeah, I think the main difference I think just even in my short time, I feel like when I started out, it was more about brevity, and conversations were thought of more goal-oriented, more task-associated. Like I still remember the day when like the technical and product leaders of my team sat us all down, had a meeting, and they were like, we're switching our tech stack to LLM. Here's everything you guys need to know. Like it was such like a, oh my God, this is like a groundbreaking moment, like milestone in my career. And it was just really funny too, because like I was so resistant to this idea that we're opening conversations up to everything and anything. Like I remember specifically in that presentation of that day, they wrote like an example user prompt of like, hey, I can't say the wake word because my glasses. Hey, do tell me all 50 states in the US. And it literally said, oh, the expectation is it should just list all 50 states. And my mind couldn't wrap around this idea of like, you want it to say it in a single shot. Like, I understand that that's what makes AI like powerful and like it doesn't need to take a breath, but gosh, that's like a long stream that you have to sit through. So I remember being very resistant to the idea and feeling like just because there is the use case, does that mean that we have to like accommodate for it or prioritize it? And I still think even today, 2026, there's still like a divergence between like value versus capability. So just something to point out.
Yeah, I've definitely seen that. I think we really need to be careful of like, what actually provides value, what actually helps users, for sure. I was wondering how you feel about this shift and where you think the industry's headed. And yeah, I guess, let's just start there.
Maybe I can start because I want to just go back to what Lisa was saying, because I think it is so important that the base still exists, that it's what are the principles of a good conversation. Now, of course, the principles might have adapted and are probably being adapted, but as conversation designers, one of I think our most important roles that we play is to figure out what is a good conversation with whoever that second actor is. And guiding the designs to match, those principles. Like Lisa was saying, collaborativity, conversationality, guardrails, safety, of course. But those, I think it all really stems. It all stems from the principles. So that's part of the question. I don't know if anyone wants to add first to that, and we can move on.
I was gonna just add that I was really excited and I still have some excitement, definitely. I'm still optimistic. But I think for me, I was really excited when LLMs came out. But what I think I didn't anticipate that everybody would start using them and everybody would now decide that I understand this and I'm an expert at this. And so that's where it has been now challenging for me because I feel like I often in the room am the naysayer. I'm often the one that has to now take on the role of saying, yeah, it's great, but we need guardrails. And is this really a good conversation? Do we actually want it to just speak for like 2 minutes straight, so in that sense, I think my enthusiasm has, waned a little bit. And I think the other thing for me is everyone's so focused on the output. For me, the what I love about LLMs is how well they can understand things. So I wish we would take a step back and focus first on the understanding piece and then move on to, well, now let's look at the output and see how to assess it. So how quickly, and for me, this is the first time, I'm sure those of you that have been here longer, what I'm reading, what I'm hearing about is this happens with a lot of technology, new innovations, that everyone gets really excited. And then there's this, that's what we're seeing right now. Everyone thinks they're an expert. Everyone wants to use it. and then design doesn't have a place yet. And people need to realize that design is really important. So although I am excited and I feel comfortable sharing that in this space, when I'm in the room with other folks, sometimes I'm the one that is less excited about using LLMs.
Yeah, I think being a skeptic is underrated in this situation. So, bringing a very simple problem and using like a chainsaw instead of a steak knife. That is sort of the analogy that I think of. Like, there are some very simple things that worked very well with deterministic solutions that if you make them LLM based, yes, they might be more conversational, but they didn't need to be, because they were very single turn. They were very command control. They were very fixed, and people very naturally could say the commands without being taught them. I think a lot of when you talk about like the input being so much more flexible, that's a huge change, right? Because with Alexa and say the Google Assistant, the original big smart speakers, people were mostly complaining that they had to learn these prescribed commands in order to get them to work, and they'd have to say the work word and then this very specific command. And now everything is more free form, which is great. So I do think you made a great point about input is being more flexible than output. But there were some things that always made sense, like turn on the lights, right? And why does that need to be LLM based? Well, you could say because you have 47 different groups of lights and it'll work better that way. But really, if they're just named just so or grouped just so intuitively, it probably still works fine with the deterministic system. So I think there is a place for skepticism to say we don't always need the strongest, biggest weapon in our technology tool belt in order to solve this customer problem, right? And sometimes you do need it and sometimes you don't. And what those situations are and assessing those situations with some practicality, I think is important.
I have Diana, do you want to add to anything to that? Because I just have a little story to tell.
I do have a comment, but it's slightly unrelated, so go ahead, Karen.
Okay, well, it's kind of related to like being the skeptic or being the expert in the room, right? So I talked to a team literally at the beginning of the week, and they have the power of the LLM. It was not within my team. I was kind of just doing a favor. It was more like a customer service kind of thing, using an LLM, the power of the LLM. It can like get context and all the FAQ stuff, and like it can do all of this. And they said we put it all together, and people can type their question. And they said, but we did all this testing and it's like falling flat. Like people aren't really engaging with it, and we want to know why. And I looked at it, and it was very much, it wasn't crafted conversation. It might have been LLM output, but it was very much like, oh, a user might be like, I need help with X. And the response was, I see you need help with X, right? And I'm like, let's think about like how, even if it's chat, like how we should respond to someone like this. It was so stilted. It didn't, like the user could have just gone to the FAQ and gotten the answer. And so like showing, and I said to them, like, this is what you need. You need like to break down the principles of an actual conversation. Like, do you need to repeat everything that the user has just asked for? Maybe not anymore. They can see it on their screen, like they've typed it, right? So it's like sometimes just the basics, and kind of once you get that going, right, the like showing how important this stuff is, then you can also build yourself up as as the expert, and people will see you like that, which is really important.
Diana, did you want to?
Yeah, I was gonna chime in a bit about like having a good foundation, or like leading the way with foundations of like what a good conversation should be like. my perspective, just given my role change, I'm a hybrid designer now. Like, I don't think just in conversation, I think across other kinds of interfaces and just general interactions. I think generally, conversation designers are a great base of people to start projects that have to think about very direct human-computer interactions. I think our skill set lends itself very well into just thinking about human and embodied AI interactions overall. And I say this kind of going back to Ashwini, you were saying like there's so many thought leaders now, but they are like users rather than designers, or they are designing conversations, but like the LLM is not working very well at whatever they're doing. So it's just, from my perspective, I see a lot of this like growth in so-called expertise. But I think actually conversation designers have been the one, like decades long. I mean, Karen, you mentioned like your years of experience. Like there's a lot of foundation here on like what good interactions look like, balancing between user flexibility versus, again, like adapting to what the user is saying, or kind of always trying to make sure that something is easy to use. It feels a little bit like you don't need a manual to learn how to use it. Those kind of principles, I think, carry across different things. And I say this because with the whole like Gen AI boom, like we're kind of in this boom era of I can ask any AI to do anything. I can make it create music. I can make it generate images. I remember like just 3 years ago, people were like selling prompts of like, hey, if you want to make like some cool like water droplet effect on this image of a human portrait, blah, blah, blah. Like, here's the prompt that you need to put into the AI. And I was always very skeptical of that, just as a conversation designer, knowing that the goal of the technology is to make it not hard to use, not like you need specific, explicit instructions. We were always going to move toward more natural language and training actually the models to understand, have more of that shared context and real world ideas between humans and models. Like if there are real world physics that our bodies are tied to, that the model should be trained on that rather than, you know, like trying to force the user to like learn everything. So I just think this is where we are right now. We're kind of in like, we're kind of boxed into like, oh, you guys are good for building conversations, but I think we're actually good on any kind of human AI interaction.
And if I can just add, because I don't want what I said to come across necessarily as a criticism, that there are people showing off their AI skills. And, you know, I just think that's natural. It's shiny, new, it is pretty accessible. And honestly, I'm seeing that these days, any job description you see is asking you, how do you use AI or how would you use AI? So people don't want to be left behind, and they want to make sure that they are able to use these tools and say that they use them. So I think it's more like the society we have built, and it is a reflection of that. You know, so I don't blame people who want to come out and say, I'm an AI expert, I'm doing these things. Like they're doing it because that's their way of trying to show that, I guess, having security, job security or something like that, right? So, but it does muddy the waters a little bit. And it is harder to kind of really look at who is an expert and who is someone that's just being, playing around with it, you know? So whose voices can be rely on and trust.
Yeah, I would say also like the interesting, like my team has open positions for like AI product designers. So it's like a little bit more well-rounded than I think that exactly what you're kind of saying. It's not just conversation design. Now we might have some roles that are focused more on modeling and model UX or conversation design, but really for our community of conversation designers, if you also can do interaction design and some of some of the other like end-to-end experiences. You're even going to go much further than like than others, because it is really about the whole end-to-end experience. So we're calling them, like, folks now, like AI product designers.
Interesting. This makes me think on this expansion of the role, kind of, it makes me think of the topic of vibe coding. This is also becoming like more and more popular. Everyone is vibe coding these days, which is really cool to see. But also sometimes I wonder if also our role might expand in that sense of like, now we're also kind of expanding into the engineering side of things. Is this something you see? Is this something you would wish for us? What are your thoughts?
So I haven't done a lot of vibe coding, I will admit that. I'm talking about a project actually with a UX design, more, visual interaction designer friend of mine, to collaborate on a vibe coding project, so that we can sort of upskill a little bit. But I do think, Ashwini's point earlier that conversation designers have always been very technical, always had an understanding of language and interaction design, but also needed to understand the underlying technology and its limitations and its boundaries. I think that's really important. We've always been a very hybrid role to begin with, and we've always also pivoted as the technology changed. So when Karen and I still were, worked together at Nuance at the beginning, not only were the flows deterministic, but the grammars, like what could be understood, was coded in something called GRXML, which then became GRXML. And you had to type in a coding type language with ands and ors and question marks and markup language, what could be understood by the system. And designers could do that. So there's always been that aspect, I think, that technical aspect to it. I've also done a lot of prototyping in my day and demo coding. So I think it's not totally new to the field to be doing some coding type work. It's just how far do you take it, right? How far are you creating production code? Or are you creating prototypes that are playable so that people can get a real feel for what the interaction is? And where do you draw that line in terms of what the boundaries of your role are, what you're focusing on most?
Yeah, I have done just a. Go ahead, Karen. Go ahead.
No, go ahead, Ashwini. Go ahead.
You do.
I was just gonna like upskilling or like keeping up should be part of our jobs. I mean, whether you're gonna use it or not, like to know how to vibe code, what it is. Again, that's gonna make us more well-rounded designers, even if we are just focusing, some of us, on the conversation part. But you gotta keep up. I mean, to know, even like, so if you're in the AI world and working with different LLMs, what does that mean to build an app or build a little experience? And it doesn't have to be anything fancy, but just to know some of those tools. That's like the new technical parts, I think, that we were talking about.
Yeah, so I was gonna say that I have vibe coded just a little bit, probably not as much as a lot of people out there. But I think, again, vibe coding is just part of this new technology. So yes, upskilling, keep up with it, learn what it is, try to do it a little bit. But what, in the end, I think one of the skills that is crucial in any field is critical thinking. So as you're vibe coding and learning about it, you need to be able to take a step back and think critically about it. Okay, so what is this good for? What will this not work for? And you can take help, go read what people have said about it, watch videos, learn. But I think it's that education piece that you need for any new technology. Try it out, but also educate yourself, but my experience with vibe coding so far tells me that those tools are great for prototyping. But if you need enterprise grade systems, vibe coding will not cut it. But I can imagine like an AI product manager, maybe it really helps them to start with vibe coding so they can communicate better on what result they're expecting, what they're envisioning, right? So really you have to think about it, play around with it, but then, use your critical thinking skills about in what context can this be helpful? You really need that. So yes, try web coding, but yeah, take a step back and think about it.
I'm going to chime in from maybe more of like the extreme end. I actually have a requirement. It's part of my job description now to use AI for my role as a product designer. Everyone on my company, actually every role in my company is now required to do it. To kind of put it into perspective, that means that we should be creating one prototype daily, and if not daily, weekly. So that's the level of expectation. We have a lot of licenses and tools available to us. So I think generally my perspective on it is I still can't use it for my job. Like if we're talking about evals or like coming up with principles about how an interaction should behave, or like how I want the model to react to, or like what are the limits of this interaction, and generally like what are the goals of this conversation or interaction, I still can't use it for that. It's gonna generate a document, but it's going to be very generic and not specific to my users or my context. Even if I feed it that data, it's not going to come up with a unique perspective on its own. It's also probably not going to help me with evals or fine-tuning at all. So I don't use it for that. I use it for like the more visual and product design part of my role, or prototyping, UXR studies, that kind of stuff. It's also kind of like a fun, let's kind of see what this interaction looks like. So I do a little bit more on the auditing side, just kind of seeing like what is the baseline expectation for these tools for users. I kind of think about it more from that perspective of like, rather than me being a user and using it to get XYZ prototype, I actually look at the tools and I try to think, okay, what are some of their design patterns and principles that they're using in this tool itself? Because something like Figma Make is very different from something like Manus. Manus is supposed to be like the super, I don't know, like a heavyweight tank that's supposed to do a lot of stuff, go in rough terrains. Like it's very powerful, versus Figma Make is very like beginner friendly. The interface looks completely different. And I always think of like trying to observe like what are those differences, and like what are people experiencing today when they are interacting with embodied AI. And I think generally my feedback about vibe coding tools is that for non-technical people, we don't actually need to read all of the transcript from the AI as it's thinking and processing and writing code. I don't know about other people, but I skipped past all of that, and I'm just like, oh, does it appear in the preview window the way that I imagined it? That's good enough for me. Or sometimes it feels restraining to be confined to a chat interface for something like vibe coding that is attached to a visual element, because I want to just like point at something and be like, okay, let's focus on this area specifically, rather than having to say, hey, this element that's in this section of the page. Like I made like a website the other day with a vibe coding tool, and I had to say like, oh, this interactive element on my hero section of the website, can you make the text like have this specific animation, and have to be like very specific? Rather, can I just like select something? I know Figma does give you like, oh, you can select something sometimes, but it doesn't give you the level of granularity that like actually pointing at something would do. So I look at it from that perspective of like, what are users experiencing today when they talk to AI?
Yeah, I've also, go ahead.
Go ahead.
Sorry.
I think that speaks to the mental models of the users, right? Like, so anyone that is developing AI products, right, they need to think about what are the existing user mental models. And clearly, when a designer is trying to design a website, I mean, even when you're talking to a colleague, you don't say this element is da 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 da. You might just point to it, hover your mouse over it, right? So that's why I think AI product design is there's still so much growth possible in that field. But yeah. Anyway, I don't know if I actually added anything valuable with this, but anyway.
No, it's so true. And I also find that like when I ask to make specific changes, sometimes something happens in the designs and it changes something else that I didn't expect. And then you have to go back and like re-ask to do it. And then at that point, it's like, could I have just done it myself manually? And would it have saved me time? There is a question in the chat. As AI use cases grow and become more varied, from customer support, AI companions, and to AIs talking to each other, what are your thoughts on specializing as a conversation designer? And should we become more of a specialist? And I know we've been talking about, like, obviously the principles stay the same, but we have to be aware of the different various roles and stuff. So just curious on your thoughts here.
I mean, I think some of our conversations so far, some of us are specialists already, kind of have come from that, and in fact, trying to upskill into being less of a specialist these days. So that's where the vibe coding comes in, and that's where like building interactions. I'm never going to be a visual designer, but understanding a little bit more of it is helpful, so I can vibe code something that is part conversational with the right conversation design principles. So I think there is a need to go deep in conversation design for a lot of roles, but having the breadth even more so today than we used to in the past will serve people really well.
Yeah, I worked for a VP who always said that designers should be T-shaped designers, so have a breadth across different areas of design and research, and then a depth in their area of specialty. And I always think of that. I think like my breadth probably has had to go wider, but that doesn't take away from the fact that I have depth in one particular area. As far as specializing in a certain type of AI agent, which is maybe what the question mentions too, agents talking to other agents, customer support, companions. I do think there are some people who their career naturally takes them in one direction, so they specialize in more companionship-based AIs versus task-oriented. Or, for example, Ashwini is now working at GM. The car space is a specialization in a certain type of environment and certain types of use cases. And I worked in the in the car space for a while as well. There's also specific domains within the car space that matter a lot, like car control, navigation, things like that. So I don't think it ever hurts to be deep in one area, but I agree with Karen that the breadth, I think, has to still be there. So don't specialize to the detriment of your becoming broader and more well-rounded as a designer.
One thing, just go ahead. No, Ashwini, now it's your turn.
Okay. Well, I was just going to say, I think there's a space for everyone, right? So we need generalists. We also need specialists. So it's really about, for me, it's more about what motivates you. And yeah, sometimes I know maybe that's a little idealistic, because sometimes it's like, hey, I just need a job to pay my bills, right? But still, if you can really like look into what motivates you, are you someone who loves being a specialist in an area? I agree with both Lisa, Karen, that you still need to understand that breadth. Is how do you communicate with people better by understanding their breadth, by meeting them somewhere where you can create that shared understanding. So you need the breadth for sure, but how much of a specialist you want to be, for me, a little bit is, what is it you want to do? Sometimes it is the company you work for. I mean, I used to work for LivePerson. It's a much smaller company than General Motors or Amazon, where I was at. So did I have to wear more hats? Absolutely. And, so some of that also depends on where you're working. Sometimes you don't get the chance to maybe dive in too deep. Sometimes you don't get the chance to have an influence on everything else, user research, analytics, So, but I do think we need both generalists and specialists, because generalists can bring a lot of people together, can tell stories really, really well if they understand a little bit of every field. I think specialists tend to nerd out sometimes on just their specialty. So I see value in both, and I think it needs to be all all those criteria, like what do you want to do, what is available to you, that might determine what you become.
I was just going to add also, like, it's still so important to have so many different types of backgrounds in our field, whether you're a specialist or generalist, right? I mean, anthropology, sociology, linguistics, cognitive science, content writing. I mean, one thing we didn't talk about was still, I think, some places like the persona becomes such a base part of, maybe it's a conversation designer's job, but like in general, what is the tone and vibe of the responses, even before you get into the details of the principles, but like what persona is this? And that there's so many different kinds of people that like could specialize or generalize, and so that diversity is still as important as ever.
Diana,
Very quickly, for any early career people who might be listening in on this session, if the question is, will specialists still be needed? Yes, I do believe that. I think we've seen over and over again people like not believing that conversation design is going to continue to exist, and yet here we are, and like the skills are still in demand, and people are able to like really go deep on just like working on like the conversation part of products and experiences. I mean, just like very quickly, like I've been looking at the job market. There are more jobs this year than there were even last year related to this discipline. So there's still going to be the demand. It's still going to exist. If that worries you, I wouldn't worry too much on like, are the jobs still going to be there? Yes, they're still going to be there. It's more kind of like to the spirit of Ashwini's asking, like, you need to reflect and ask yourself, what are your career goals and what do you want to do? Do you actually want to be a specialist? Because there will be demand for them. There's also still going to be demand for generalists. And also, I think generally speaking, like careers are so weird, and they will go in many different directions that you do not plan for them to go on. So even whatever decision you make today, it can be overturned and overruled in a few years, and that's totally normal and fine. Like I'm personally experiencing like a very weird transition state where I feel like I'm starting from, I don't know, beginning zero, or not really zero, but like I've definitely restarted in my career just in the past year. So I think it's okay. Like, and then like very quickly did want to nitpick, because I did read AIs talking to AIs. I don't know if that's going to be a design task. I think that's going to be more of an engineering role, just because AI talking to AI using human language is the most ineffective communication between two AIs. I think they can talk to each other on a more binary level even. So I'm not sure if conversation designers will actually be involved in that, but for more agentic AI and other stuff, yes, we will still be there.
Oh, go ahead, Giulia.
No, I was just like picking on there's more roles and there's still opportunities out there and so on. And one thing that always comes to mind to me when we talk about that is like all the different names and variations of conversation design titles we have seen and are still seeing coming up. I think we have prompt engineer, prompt designer, AI designer, I don't know, so many other things. what are your thoughts on these titles? Like, do you have a favorite one? Do you think this is helping us all like have having all these titles and ways to identify, or is it actually hurting in some way? Would love to hear your thoughts.
I guess I could say it doesn't help. Oh, sorry.
Sorry, I was just going to say I care very little about titles. I think it's what the job actually is. And I think it sort of muddies it to have like 7 different permutations of calling what we do. It took like a while for it to migrate from VUI designer to conversation designer. And I think conversation designer being more accurate because it covers, voice and chat, and not just the audio interaction, but also the typing piece. But I don't have like a new favorite, if anything. I mean, I know Karen mentioned like product AI designer. That's probably okay. But I think just, coming up with a bunch of different names for doing the same thing is sort of it's a fun game. But is it is it like actually useful? Unless somebody proves to me that it's super descriptive of what we do in a way that makes it more useful, then I don't think it really matters that much. But maybe other folks have more less ornery thoughts about it. Because I also think we're all product designers in some sense, and with a specialization, right? We're all designing products. That's like the basic definition.
I think the title branching really is more detrimental, like the more early career you are. Like I've heard the complaint over and over, like, I don't even know what job searches to do on LinkedIn, like how it's going to catch those jobs. But on this side of it, like 5 years in, I don't really worry too much about like the divergences of the job titles, because ultimately my experience is already in conversation design. What else can you do? Like at that point, the recruiters are trying to find me. So it's a little bit different. So it matters a little bit less like what specifically that title is within CXD. And then again, like product design still has this thing going on as well, like UX designer, UI designer, UX UI, product designer. They still have these title divergences, and I think they're doing just fine. But it's certainly hard to get started. I think that's like my main point here.
Yeah, I agree. I think it's a reflection of the fact that this is still a transition. So we have all these, it's even more like the number of ways you can, what to call a conversation designer. Like the terms are just infinite, it seems like right now. They were always a little bit, there was never ever one term, right? There's always been some variation. But now it really seems like because we are in a moment of change, sorry about that. I don't know if you can hear it, but I basically got a phone call. Anyway, but I was going to say that I think you raise a really good point. It's for newcomers, anyone trying to pivot, anyone trying to get into the industry, recruiters that are new, because, they are also people that, graduate and become recruiters. For them to be able to understand, like, what does this title mean? It's really tricky, and I think it is detrimental. So I always think about focusing on the description. What does the description actually say I need to do? I need to be able to do. And again, I agree. Like, when you have a platform like LinkedIn, where if you are searching for a job, they recommend you put these titles on your profile. What title do you decide to put there? It's hard. So instead, again, it really is about the recruiters being aware that it's the skills that matter and not the title. And I don't know how many of them are aware. We might be wasting a lot of people's time now by doing recruiter one-on-ones, hiring manager one-on-ones, and then realizing if someone fits the bill or not. So I do think it's more detrimental. But yeah, I think, yeah, those of us that have been here long might know how to showcase our skills.
Yeah. I think that you make the right point, Ashwini, which is it's the job description that matters. It's the what are you going to do in that role that is the most important part, not necessarily the name that you slap onto it. Unless, like I said, there's some perfect descriptive name that I haven't seen, because most of them really are more just narrow. So like prompt engineer is very narrow. Some of the ones that I've seen sort of distill it down into something that's maybe not as broad as what we actually do.
So I guess that begs the question then, what, actually, this is coming from the chat too, what skills are in demand for conversation designer roles today, in today's job market? Because I know there's so many different aspects of what we experiment with all these new tools and stuff. So what should people actually focus on so you get noticed?
I think this is a great question. I think I've been on the job hunt myself recently. So I have talked to different employers about what they're interested in and what they want. I think some experience with generative AI is important now because it's been around long enough. It's been 2 or 3 years. So if you say you've only worked on, highly deterministic systems, that's going to be not the direction that they're likely heading. So they'd love someone, but I don't think it's, you have to have been on the bleeding edge of it. I think just having been exposed to it and having experimented with it is important. I think the ability to prototype still really important and desired by a lot of employers. And then just an understanding of how some of the things we've talked about, which is the core principles of conversation design, I think are still valid, but understanding that the ways that we manipulate the technology to get the input and output that we want working properly are different. So I would say it's a set of skills that have always been important for conversation design, and then a couple new things.
Yeah, I agree. I think conversation design foundations, and then, the technical side, which is, do you know what an API call is? Do you know how these systems work together? So that type of technical, more systems thinking, user journey, part of the UX, But then additionally, definitely understanding how an LLM works is key for me. I feel like it's not just I've played around with Gen AI and I'm able to get it to do things, because that means you play around maybe with one model, 2 or 3. As the models keep changing, do you actually understand the technology behind it? Not maybe in depth to be like someone who's, creating models or necessarily, but, but having at least more than a superficial understanding of what is an LLM. How did we create LLMs? When they put out a result, what are they trying to do on the back end? For me, I feel like that's the addition now. But yeah, conversation design foundations, if you don't have that, then definitely it would not be a good fit.
And I'd love to hear what Karen has to say about that, because I do think it's different at some of the companies that create their own models. And maintain their own models, and where the conversation designers are giving input to model creation versus enterprises where they're consumers of commercial models, and maybe doing competitive analysis also of like which model suits us better. I think there's a difference between being in-house and someplace that's creating their own LLM versus someplace that is utilizing them.
That's what I was going to add as well. It was there's a class, there are certain, some conversation designers that are model UXers, and they are really working closely with the model for both like writing system instructions, but knowing the principles and the persona. And so how do you get the LLM to do that? And I think like Diana mentioned, evals, a huge portion is how do you evaluate those principles? Like, how do you know that like we did a good job? How do you measure being collaborative. This is so important for the end to end. So I think that like model UX, or I mean conversation design, that's a whole area that you can go really deep and definitely find jobs around that.
Diana, any thoughts there?
I will confess that, again, I'm not really CXD anymore. I'm this new breed of designer called AI product designer, and I'm still figuring out what that means exactly, as I'm sure other companies are. Specifically, I'm hybrid, so I do work on AI products and experiences, but I do a little bit of like the model, like benchmarking and like making sure that we're using like the right model for the right use case, and then also like training that model. And then I also work on like end-to-end features of like, okay, this is like the experience for user connects this account, and like here's how the user is going to extract the information, and like traditional like conversation design, just like LLM based. And a lot of it is also like vision and strategy of like, how are we thinking about AI in general on this team or on my team. So I don't really have tips on like what skills in conversation design, but I think if you are interested in corporate design or interested in some of like these bigger companies who might have their own in-house models, I think it's really important to always carry two things with you, which is generally storytelling and presentation design. These two will always serve you very well, no matter what you do or where you go. And I say this because when people don't understand what I'm doing, like I'll literally be working out of docs and spreadsheets, while my product designers who are like more on the traditional side will have all their beautiful pixels. I tell them like, oh, my job is to like slap the model on the wrist if it does something bad. So like having these analogies and like great storytelling and just like being able to build a narrative, I think is going to help you a lot, especially when people don't understand what you do.
Yeah, absolutely. And I know Karen and Lisa have to drop. So I think this is a great ending point. And if you have, I just wanted to thank you all so much for being here. And if you have any final thoughts, please feel free to share them. There are some extra questions in the chat. I might just tag you, but I just thank you all. This was a great conversation, and there's so much goodness in here. So
I think the last thing I would say was just that like things are evolving and we're all evolving with it as well, and like keep up with that like evolution. Like we have to do it too, and it's not always easy, but what an interesting time to be working in this space. I mean, really like an amazing, there's amazing opportunities out there, and our skills are needed.
Yeah. Agree 100%. All right.
Great. So thank you so much, everyone, and stay tuned. We'll have more stuff coming up soon. So thank you for joining.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Great day. Bye.
Bye.